IT Insights, talks on business and IT challenges with tech leaders.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of IT Insights by Future Processing. Today I have a pleasure of speaking to Ian Max Ewart. Ian is a C-suite commercial executive, director, board member, and an advisor with 30 plus years of career in international financial services. Ian is known as industry leader and reference for marketing, business development, and innovation. And I'm extremely happy to have you here with me today, Ian. It's a great pleasure.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here as well to have this opportunity.
Would you be so kind and introduce yourself a bit more to our audience? Tell about your background and what you're up to at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go very quickly over the fact that it's a 30-year career. It seems to have gone very fast already for me. But what's been interesting is that I started out working in private banking, wealth management. I had the opportunity to work in asset management, and all of those opportunities were in interesting countries at interesting times. So a lot of my career was based out of Switzerland, but during that period we were transitioning from what I would call an old relationship model to more of an IT-enabled model. And then I've also had a great experience in Asia and in North America as well. So I've sort of followed certain trends where you kind of go from the old continent to the new continent, and you see the way things are being done differently. And I've seen as well the way that regulation, which is a big driver of change across financial services, gets adopted in different places at different times. So if anything, I can just encapsulate it in one word, which is always interesting. The Chinese have this curse, may we live in...
Yeah, I was just about to reference it. May you live in interesting
I think
times.
I've always lived in interesting times, yeah. And we can...
But it looks like you enjoy it.
Oh, I love it. I like especially the way the industry has evolved because of the use of technology and the adoption of technology. And the reason behind that is not that I don't love the human interaction. I do, but I just think we get better quality human interaction when you have the technology enabled to take out some of the kind of dreary tasks behind it all. When I was at university, for instance, I remember visiting a car factory, the Jaguar car factory, in fact, in Coventry, in Browns Lane. And at the time, the Jaguars were still very much sort of handcrafted. Everything was very, very much made by hand. I went back to that same factory 15 years later, and whilst on the outside it looked the same, internally everything was changed. And it was all changed because of technology, just-in-time delivery. The whole environment was light, bright. All the pieces were coming together, whereas in the past it had been just as you imagine a factory, noisy, dirty, smelly, none of that at all. And I think it's similar, the kind of transition we've been through in financial services. The sorts of things which were a little bit crazy and, used to take ages, getting a coupon on a bond, collecting a share, those kind of things. Everything was pieces of paper. Everything had to be done in person. And now, of course, we can do that at the click of a button. And it's...
Yeah, that's it's definitely interesting to be a spectator of such incremental change.
And I think you use a really good word there, incremental change. So, the change happens in increments. The change happens almost in a kind of a way that we don't see until we look back, or until we like visiting that same factory 15 years later. You go back and you see a changed circumstance and you realize, oh my goodness, just how much things have changed, how far we've come, because we're continually seeing improvements. We continually see the way things have evolved. And obviously, we've all lived through a big period of change with the pandemic, where I would argue, perhaps 10 or 15 years of change have basically been concertinaed into a short period. We adopt things much more easily now. Yeah.
Which has its ups and downs, definitely. The level of disruptions we have to cope with is humongous.
Yeah.
Anyway, looking at your experience, which is impressive, you currently work with a number of technology companies as an advisor to boards of directors and stakeholders. So could you shed some light, or maybe share a sneak peek behind the curtains? What are the most important aspects big level companies focus on today, the big fishes? What's the conversation about?
So I can give you my point of view on that, right? So I've always thought, when you see a topic or you see an area that you think is ripe for improvement and could be improved, then you find a piece of technology, or you find somebody who has a solution, or somebody who's doing something maybe in another industry that could be applied. I really enjoy solving those problems. So I've always been very interested, as you mentioned in the introduction kindly, in the topics around business development, around commercial development for firms, just because I think there are other industries that were doing it better, doing it more systematically. And, as a marketeer, CRM was a big topic, right? So, you kind of want to get inside the data, you want to understand how you can make those data analytics work, and then what you can do with that data. Now, in the end, it turns out that all the advances around data and analytics, they've all happened somewhere else, but we've been able to bring them in. They've happened with Amazon, they've happened with Google, they've happened with Facebook, but we've been able to import into financial services the good aspects, I would argue, of that. So what I'm trying to do at my own little level is look at the kind of topics which have been of interest to me. Lots of them are closely related to governance and understanding how regulation affects people in their day to day. So I have an involvement with an operational risk firm, which is ASIN, and ASIN work around how we can network and benchmark data to have a better controls and risk environment. So that's about how you make the industry safer. And my involvement with CORE is very much around the product governance and understanding how the whole process of innovation around financial services products can happen. And then I've been fortunate enough to get involved in a big topic which is of interest for me, which is all about financial education. And I have a couple of interests in firms where in about a year's time I'm going to be able to tell you more about that. But they're a little bit. Yeah, they are exciting. Yeah. Everything takes longer than you think it's going to take, right? So,
Sounds exciting.
There's this very interesting report that your firm brought out about ROI on IT projects. Maybe we'll talk a little bit around that too. But one of the things that I have seen in all places at all times, 100% of the costs get realized, and not necessarily 100% of the revenues. But you have the costs, you have the delays, you have the time, and part of the skill is being able to maintain your persistence, be resilient, and make sure you follow through on it. Right?
I very much relate to what you said about things taking more time than you expect they would. And patience and persistence are definitely key and crucial when it comes to achieving any sort of progress. But since you already touched on the aspect of ROI,
Yeah.
I was about to ask you a question, based on your experience in that matter. In the matter, what are, like, if you were to name the most important aspects to take into account when holistically looking at the subject of ROI and measuring returns on investments in the fields of technology, finance, etc. How would you encapsulate that?
Yeah. So I think hats off to you guys already, because bringing up the topic,
Thanks.
it's like one of those. It's like one of those things, like they talk about in particle physics, right? If you want to affect a change, you look at something, right? And just the fact that you look at it makes the particles behave differently, maybe disparately as well, but differently. So I think the benefit of looking at return on investment is very much in the discipline itself. So the fact that people go into a conversation knowing that we are interested in what the outputs are going to be, not theoretically interested, but we're going to manage this. We're going to focus in on it is a very important aspect, because you see projects where nobody feels the ownership. Nobody feels the kind of crucial nature of what they're doing. It's almost like an optional free ticket. And those kind of projects, they have, I would argue, low levels of success. Ownership is key, and championing. So that could be have many champions. It can be in many places, but slicing the project, slicing it down so that you have it in manageable bites, I think is really important. So that usually means we need to have good data around the project. We need good analysis around what the aspects of success could look like, how it could be managed at a scale where you or I could influence it. Because if nobody feels that they can influence those outcomes, then it's very hard for a committee in those circumstances to ever come together and ever affect the proper change. So you need concerned individuals, you need responsible individuals, all working together, all understanding what the bigger communication around what the project might be. So if we take an IT project as an example, I think the opportunities now have never been better because you don't necessarily need to think about a big data migration. The opportunities to be able to transform data and to do migrations of data in slices in a more managed way are available now. Whereas in the past, it kind of had to be an all or nothing. You have to switch your systems off. So this whole way in which we're able to think about how we manage, how we de-risk. And I do believe that term around de-risking, taking the risk out of the execution, the risk out of the scope of what you're going to do, is a really good principle. So when you understand something well, you can get inside the risk and you can say, okay, so what is the minimum that we have to do in order to achieve base camp? And then from base camp, we can go to the next level and then up to the next level, but all the time managing out the risk. And I think those three or four factors are key. The individuals, the scope and the empowering of those individuals to be able to do that, the insight and the knowledge and understanding, so about their professionalism really to be able to manage that, empowered with data, and then the shared vision that we want to make this happen, but we're going to make it happen in a controlled and managed, de-risked way. I think those are key.
It's a very interesting point of view on ROI, which is, from what I hear, mostly, predominantly non-pecuniary, not related to money, but instead risk and more intangible aspects of returns or potential benefits or losses related to the product. Very interesting.
I'll tell you why, Michael, because usually around any of these projects, there's always somebody worrying about the cost
Mhm.
aspects, right? You had to get the budget
How much
signed
money
for it.
will this $1 spent
Yeah,
on that make?
yeah. So this week, for instance, I sat down with a very senior guy from a very large bank here in the UK, and he said to me, "Oh, this project it was scheduled to cost 18 million pounds, and now we're already at 29, and it's not finished. So it's going to be 35, right? So his 18 million pound project is going to become a 35 million pound project, right? Uh, Everything will be explainable. You'll be able to understand that. This is not about corruption or about poor management. This is about, was there really ever shared understanding at the beginning? Was the scope understood? How did the elements of cost get accounted for? Was it just poorly structured? How can you have a doubling of spend? You might argue. Well, it's very easy if you completely underestimated what's in scope and out of scope, and many projects go through that sort of transition as the project life evolves. But I do think having somebody worrying about the numbers is really important, but worrying about how the execution is going to happen, I think, is where you can make the most influence over the project.
You briefly, in your previous sentence, touched on the aspect of data and measuring, different kind of stuff, different aspects. And my understanding is that the financial sector is the vertical where the amounts of data and the value related thereto to tap into is huge. But is it actually a leverage fintechs, banks, etc. are using, or what's your take on that? On where we are when it comes to being data driven, data led, etc.
So I can only speak from my experience, but and I read a lot around the subject, so I see all the claims that everybody is making and so on. But there are, I think, some basic steps that you can take around understanding your data. So there's too much data, right? We know that to begin with, and the important thing is to have data which is they're going to be usable or which is going to be used in some way and is going to influence a decision. And then to build your decisioning around validating that data, because you don't want to get into a kind of um, a cycle of where you're asking questions of the data, but the data is only answering the questions that you're asking. You want the insight to come out of that. So first of all, let's get the data, then let's structure the data. Let's be sure what we're going to be using it for. And then we need to start thinking about how we're going to get analytical around that data and how we're going to visualize it. Because many people understand the impacts of the data more when they can visualize it rather than just seeing the raw data, right? So this is where I think a lot of data projects fall over. Is that you can ask me any question you want. The guy with the cube can sort of sits there and says, yeah, we can pull that data, but actually it only becomes alive when you can visualize it and when you can see. Maybe it's by a tranche of clients, or maybe it's by users of a certain product, or maybe it's by age or by sex, whatever parameters you want to put around it. You start to be able then to pull out some insights once you can actually visualize, and that's when you start to have some interesting analytics. And that, of course, then sets you up to say, well, what could happen next around this? And that's where you can get into the opportunities of deploying this data for some kind of machine learning process, or eventually perhaps for an AI application where you can actually start training the data and understanding, well, what happens if we need to find out more about this? Are the questions that we could be asking either around a product or service, the preferences of our clients, the expectations of our clients? Most client disappointment is due to expectations being unfulfilled. It's not about service failure. It's that I thought something else was going to happen, or I thought this was going to be a better outcome, or I expected something different. And that's where their disappointment kicks in. So, I think using this data in a way that takes you on a journey right the way through, from data through analytics, through visualization, right the way going up towards this idea of how do I use this in an intelligent way. And that's really what AI is about, right? Which is about informing and being informed by the users of the data.
AI is another subject I wanted to dive deeper into a bit, because there's of course a lot of big talk about uh, what's there available when it comes to AI and machine learning, but um, is it is it not overhyped, or maybe perhaps in the fintech industry there's space where already that sort of innovation and sexiness in technology is being used on a commercial basis. What do you think?
Well, I think it's certainly being deployed, and if you look at the opportunities, for instance, around credit scoring, around um, the applications around payments and validation and so on.
Naturally, I mean, of course, maybe to clarify, of course, there's good number of use cases
Yeah.
in different in plenty industries, as well as in finance industry. But aren't these use cases slightly below what was said AI is gonna do? I mean, there was a lot of big talk about how AI is the magic wand, etc. And at the end of the day, you can get a nicely working chatbot, but is it
Yeah.
isn't it like shooting with a cannon to a fly, or are we actually leveraging this technology, or is it just another you know tool set in the box?
Well, so you see, I think it's a classic case of where things are taking a little bit longer than we imagined that they would, right? And I think we're about a quarter of the way so far. and that's why it's a little bit disappointing. I don't think we're there yet, right? So, um, I think we've been impressed with some of the bots that we see. I think we can be rightly impressed by some of the applications of AI. And I think there are certain fields where, um, notably in defense, but also, for instance, in healthcare, where the use of data is already showing that AI is much better at identifying cancers, for instance, rather than people who are trained to look at results, much more systematic. So perhaps it's a little bit around how systematic we're going to be in the deployment, and perhaps we've started by saying how can we eliminate the boring. So how do we take a call center of 10,000 people and make it into a call center of 5,000 people? Can we make more use of bots? But maybe actually what we should have done is sort of said, how can we make a call center of 10,000 people feel like a call center of 50,000 people, by giving them use of that data and the ability to answer more, the ability to provide more insight, etc. And I think that would be really interesting. I looked at some of the examples, for instance, recently around car insurance, and where cars, when a car has an accident, and the ability to deploy AI to actually assess from a photograph what's happened to a car, and whether it's and how much it will take, how much it will cost to repair the car. Well, those are fantastic applications, because it means that within minutes you can just upload your photographs and you can have the approval to go ahead and get your car repaired.
Sounds handy.
Yeah, that's handy. But uh, will that get will that change the face of humanity? Maybe not. Yeah.
I do. When you said it, I completely agree that things take time,
Yeah, but
and
I think there are
we as humans are impatient.
we are impatient, and I also think we are sometimes limited by our own imagination and our own ability to imagine certain things as well. So one of the aspects that we mustn't lose sight of with a regulated industry like financial services is that the providers of these services have a duty to all customers potentially. And so, we have to think about people who have impairments of all sorts, or might have a disability, or people who might be of a certain age, who might not be familiar with the technology, etc. So, you cannot have a one size fits all. You need to be able to adapt. And perhaps there are groups in society that are better able to adapt to certain kinds of technology, and other groups that are not necessarily. And so I think much more personalized journeys in the future, much more personalized around my choices, my priorities. Do I prefer to speak to an individual, or actually do I want to be able to do everything just through a computer? Choice, giving me choice, and maybe there's a cost attached to it as well in the future as well, right? But if I can do everything, a little bit like the kind of capsule hotel, where you can check in, you just use your card, you don't need to talk to another individual, nobody serves you anything, you don't get to meet anybody, and on the way out you just put your sheets down into a chute, and the whole room is cleaned, and the next one ready for the next one. And then there's the 5-star hotel where I can't even get to the butter, because there's a special waiter that gives me the butter, and a special one that gives me the cream, and so on.
Yeah. Very, very, very good comparison. I
They have a
like it.
different price point,
It
right?
makes sense.
And right now, I don't. It's not that I feel sorry for the financial services firms, but we're kind of asking them to be all things to all people, but then they have to do that within one
What you referred to for a moment was inclusiveness, as far as I
yeah,
understand.
yeah,
Being
yeah,
how let's say, if I were to somehow combine the topics we spoke about today with AI, modern technology and stuff, etc., all that sort of good stuff, with applications and solutions that improve inclusiveness. do you already see that happening, or is it something that's still being, discovered, or just in theory?
I think we're on the way. I would say we're embarked on the journey. We're certainly not at the destination, but I think we're certainly on the way to encouraging inclusiveness. But there is a lot more to be done. But the good thing is, I think that the society gets it, right?
Look, hopefully, looks like it.
Yeah.
Um, I've heard that you are working on a book.
Well, it's more than a book. It's kind of a thesis, to be honest with you. So when I say it's more than a book, it's also maybe less than a book as well. So my idea is around. So it's an idea around what I'm calling the civilized company. So what would it take to be a civilized company in the future, and how does a civilized company behave? So we have a lot of debate at the moment, which is very live, around water companies in the UK, or this big topic which is hanging over the whole of Europe around the price of gas and generating electricity and so on and so forth going forward. It's also true for financial services around the provisions of pensions and thinking about mortgages and how do we access investment within society. So what does it take to be a civilized company in a civilized society? What does it mean to be civilized in these times? What's the attitude of a civilized manager? We have this trend that's happening at the moment, we're told, which is quietly quitting, where people are deciding that, I won't do the best I can in my job. I'll just do the minimum. I'll just do what it takes to get by, to stop me getting fired. Well, why would people be behaving that way, right? Why are people quietly quitting? Because they're reassessing what? Their value to society, where they fit in, their relationship with their employer. I don't have the answers yet, but that's what I want to discover. So it's much more about where does profit fit? We're talking about super taxes on certain companies here in the UK at the moment. I know across Europe, there've been all kinds of discussions around, how the oil and gas industry should be regulated. Seeing great big changes, for instance, in the Netherlands around the dairy industry and commitments to net zero, commitments around how we think about the greening of the economy and so on. Well, all of these things bring their own dynamic. All of them bring their own complexity. And just as individuals have to evolve in a kind of civilized society, how do companies evolve in that civilized society? That intrigues me.
That's very inspiring that you're looking at it from that high level of a perspective. Sounds like a very complex issue to review, and I'm very much looking forward to understanding your point of view once it's there.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian, for this conversation. It was very inspiring. I very much enjoyed it.
Me too. And thank you again for the report and the insight that your company produced as well around the.
Thank you, Ian, for speaking so highly. And thank you, our listeners, for being with us on this another episode. If you liked it, don't hesitate to share it, and see you soon.
Visit us at itinsights.tech and dive into our podcasts, webinars, and events.